Meeting of,
Recording in progress.
like to open the Planning and Building Committee meeting of October 4th. Are we all on order?
Yep.
Okay. Now the October 4th Planning and Building Committee meeting, and why don't we start with a roll call, starting with Councilmember Markley
Here.
and Councilmember Frenich
Here.
and City Administrator Pasecki.
Here.
And let's see, Planning Director Katrina Knudsen
I'm here.
and Senior Planner Carl DeSimmis
Here.
and Paul Rice from the, I guess the inspection activity, I would call it.
I'm here.
Okay, I think I've got everybody, and Cindy Andrews is here from Katrina's shop, recording all this stuff. Great. Okay, you all should have gotten a copy of the minutes from the September 7th meeting. And do we have a motion to approve those minutes?
Move to approve the minutes.
And a
Second.
second. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. They are approved. Okay, agenda items. Like I said, the first item, the Downtown Waterfront Alliance parking study results, we'll just push that to next meeting. If you can't stand the suspense, the new news was the data they collected this summer. And what it showed is that the volume of parking is back up to where it was in August of this year, back up to where it was in 2019. So we've pretty much recovered from the pandemic downturn in parking downtown. It seems like it's right back where it was. The second item was they actually did some concurrent counts of available parking spaces, particularly empty parking spaces, not only on the streets, the public streets, but also in private parking lots. And what they concluded is there is considerable space available in private parking lots when the streets are pretty well filled up. Okay, so that begs the question: can something be worked out where we can share some of those spaces, or move people like employees, for example, into those private parking areas to make more public parking space available on the street? Okay, so that's what he's going to talk about. Now you got a clue, but he'll show you the data in that when he comes here to the next meeting. It's fairly compelling. It may be a significant task to get an agreement amongst the players in this one, but to be quite honest, it's really the downtown community. It's kind of in their hands as to, do they share for the community good, or do they require some kind of significant compensation or something else to do that? So with that, why don't I move to agenda item number 2, which is Pierce County 2044 population, housing, employment growth targets. And that's the AHBL working document dated 9/1/21. It's got my name behind it. So what I will do is get my edition of this out here. Hold on just a second. And I will have that. Okay. Yeah, what I'd like to do is find out if there's any questions leading up to what I call the 2 key displays in there. Most of the information in there is what I call background information, definitions, things like market factor and items like that. Vacant land versus underutilized land. That's all in what I would call the definition section of that report. So are there any questions leading up to table 2 or table 14? Those are the 2 key displays in there, I think, that are the ones that we'd like to talk about. I'll take that as a yes. Let's go. Okay. Some things, and by the way, now I'm referring to the thing I sent to you last evening on the information coming out of that document. The first one is the table 2 in that document, and I think it's on page number 5. Okay, if you've got that document either online right now or you've got it in paper form. And the big, it's the cities and towns growth, and it gives it by the type of metropolitan area, that is metropolitan cities, core cities, high capacity transit communities, cities and towns, urban areas, blah, 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 blah. And you can see it all adds up to 100% of the so-called 2020 to 2044 targets, which are over on the right-hand part of the table. Okay, is that everybody with me so far? Haven't lost anybody? Great. Okay, and as you can see, the cities and towns which we are part of, Gig Harbor is considered part of the city and town grouping. We basically have got 7% of the total target of 264,784 units for Pierce County. Okay, so then, by the way, that 7% translates into 18,535 people that are shared across all of the cities and towns. Okay. Okay, now let's go to table 14 on page 13. That's the one that's very interesting. That one shows the cities and towns breakdown. Okay. And you can see it starts at the top there with Bonnie Lake, and it goes on down all the way through Wilkinson, and then shows you the totals at the bottom, except for the submitted targets so far. Let's go across the columns there first. First of all, the estimated 2020 populations, that's history. That's where we were last year, according to their best information. And as you can see there, Gig Harbor, they show at 11,240. And I think that's a pretty good number, if I remember correctly. You'll also notice that there's no numbers in there for 2020, 2044 population growth for Gig Harbor. We're the one of the holdouts in this process to this point. So looking at this, the only thing that's missing on this is if you go down to the bottom of the 2020 to 2044 population growth column, they didn't put a total down there for what had been submitted as of this date. Okay. And the magic number is 17,518. That is the targets summed up for all of these cities or towns, less Gig Harbor, which, by the way, puts you roughly 1,000 residents away from the bottom line target for the cities and towns of 18,535 people. Okay, so that's one way you can look at it is if we were of a devious nature, which we're not, we could say, well, if we only put forth our target of 1,017 residents, we could make Pierce County whole in an instant. Okay, not, let's just say, if it wasn't for the fact that we were the last one to put our number in there, there's no other rationale that would justify that number I can think of. So, like I said, we're close, and we will be close to that, I think. Any questions at this point on the numbers that are presented in this table or what this means going forward. Okay, we're good to this point. Great. So I put together a derivation similar to what I had at our last meeting using two key points. And the first one was the total geography share of 18,535. For some reason, I didn't have that number. I had to derive it, and the number I was coming out with was significantly higher than that. Okay. So that's probably the biggest thing that wasn't there. Looking down on under that derivation of Gig Harbor population target, starting there with the Gig Harbor's proportionate share of the 18,535 residents growth for total Pierce County cities and towns based upon the 2020 actual population. And I mentioned before that particularly at a high regional level, the growth target going forward is essentially directly proportional to the population in each one of the jurisdictions. Okay, there's some pluses or minuses if you're talking rapid transit centers, that type of thing, but it appears to be the starting point is population at that in the current year, which is 2020 for purposes of this report. So anyway, if you take a proportionate share and you say, well, we're at 11,240 in 2020.
Mr. Chair, you have a question from Councilmember Franich.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand there, Jim.
Okay. So Katrina, on page 14, on table 15, do all of the cities and towns that are listed there, are they all using a different PPH number?
Yes, each of the cities has well, there's some of them that may have the same persons per household, but they're all calculated differently for each of the jurisdictions. And that depends on not only what their current persons per household is, but also their consistency with the countywide planning policies. For instance, our current persons per household or PPH is 1.8. That is what was utilized in the previous allocation processes. However, we have argued based on new information that our persons per household should increase to 2.2 persons per household. And that is adjusted with the census as well as policy adjusted. Overall, Pierce County PCRC electeds have stated that our persons per household will reduce over the next 20 years, and that is true for most jurisdictions. However, Gig Harbor was the only jurisdiction whose persons per household increased over this last 20-year period, and we know that that's due to going from a bedroom community to having more single-family homes. So moving forward, our persons per household recommended is 2.2.
And that you feel will be accepted?
Yes.
Okay, so my other question is, in looking at that table, estimated the first column, estimated 2020 housing units is 31,076.
That's the total.
So, oh, that's the total. So
yeah,
the 5302 for Gig Harbor.
Yes.
Is what we have right now?
As of 2020.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure I was on the right page. Thank you.
Yeah, and just a quick caveat to these numbers, likely they have all changed because the initiation of the data was sometime in early 2020, and we now have an additional year that has gone on. So whatever numbers it ends up that is adopted regionally, they'll have to be adjusted to come up to the base year of our periodic update, which would be June of 2024. And we will take care of that in likely 2022, bringing these numbers up to the current date.
So where they're talking about estimated 2020 housing units, that does not take into consideration anything in the pipe. Those are actual homes that are, or residences that are in place right now.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so moving right along, I came to the conclusion that as a starting point, if you go along with this concept of proportionate share, and I think those words show up several times in the report, proportionate share as the starting point. We make up about 14.3% of the population of cities and towns in Pierce County. And therefore, we should get 14.3% of the 18,535 total 2020 to 2024 target, which comes out about 2,660 residents. Okay, and again, there's assumptions there, but the proportionate share concept goes throughout this report, and I've seen it before in these numbers. Obviously, we overachieved construction of dwelling units in the 2010 to 2020 period relative to target by about 800 units. And that was in the analysis that I had at our last meeting. Okay, the fact that we were over that amount. So that this, if you go with the 800 dwelling units that you're over, and I saw the census number, it said 2.3, but 2.2 versus 2.3, they're pretty darn close. I wouldn't debate that. It says we built about 1,840, we had 1,840 residents in excess of our growth target that are attributable to the housing. Now I realize in that we're actually higher than that. And the reason we're higher than that is we also achieved, as was mentioned, increase in dwelling unit size as far as number of occupants go, from 1.9 or whatever it was, 1.8, 1.9, up to this 2.2 or 2.3. So it would even be higher than that if we work strictly with population numbers. So anyway, adjusting proportionate share target of 2,660 residents to account for these 1,840 excess residents results in what I believe is a fairer and more defendable 2020 to 2044 Gig Harbor growth targets. And of course, the next is just the math, called 2660 minus 1840 is 820 residents, or basically 7.3% growth over the 24-year period. Now, by the way, that number, and if you've been starting with the 2660 number, we are substantially under the 1% to 1.3% growth guesstimates that we had before. We were working with those kind of numbers. Correct me if I'm wrong, Carl. I think those are the kind of numbers you were looking at, somewhere in that ballpark. And by the way, the thing that's bringing that down substantially is this magic 18,535 number. That, like I said, I didn't have that before, and that changes a lot. Okay, that says as a group, cities and towns is making up a smaller share of the bottom line target. So if we do that, adopting the 820 resident growth target for Gig Harbor, it would put Pierce County within about 1% of its total cities and towns 2020 growth target of 18,535, assuming the numbers in that table remain the same. Okay, if they start juggling numbers, I'm not sure what could happen. Okay, it could go up, down, sideways. It could do anything. I'm assuming the ones in table 14 are fairly stable, the ones that have been submitted already. Okay. Just for the sake of discussion, if you look in that table, comparing to some of the other cities 2020, 2000 to 2044 that should be population growth targets. The Milton growth target is about 8.8% over that same period. And the Ording growth target is about 6.4% over that same period. And by the way, I'll put an asterisk next to that one. The chairperson of the Pierce County Regional Council is the mayor of Ording. So, but for whatever that's worth, they're doing 6.4%. Stillicum got a growth target of 7.1%. So what I concluded was I was kind of worried that we would be way out in left field with a 7.3% growth target. What I concluded is we're not way out in left field. We got some fellow people in the field with us already. Okay. Now there may be different reasons, but at least in terms of just a raw percentage number, we're in good company. So going to the bottom line, at least based on the analysis that I did, the 820 residents and 350 dwelling units, Gig Harbor 2020 to 2044 growth targets. Number one, I think they're fair, and I know there'll be some discussion on that. Called, hey, some analogies I put forth called not carrying that credit forward is sort of like having the bank in December, you get some credits on your checking account. And when the new year arrives, the bank says, nah, we don't carry credits into the new year. That doesn't work, okay? Another good one is halftime in a basketball or a football game. One team outscores the other one by, let's say 30 points. Let's make it a nice big number. And at halftime, the officials decide, nah, I'll tell you what, let's do. Let's extend it another half and throw away everything that took place in the first half, okay? The whole concept of credit, building credits, is pervasive throughout our financial systems, our sports systems. I can think of a bunch of things, examples, where you just don't do that. I think they're defendable. They also are supportive of Pierce County targets. Like I said, if we come in with these numbers and the other ones are stable, Pierce County will be within 1% of its total target for cities and towns. And of course, the big one is they give us the opportunity to catch our breath on supporting infrastructure and services while hanging on to our small city character. And right now, I would say in terms of infrastructure, particularly public works, we're a good year to 2 years behind the 8 ball right now, where we thought we would have been a year and a half ago. Everything's slid. The road projects have slid, the parks projects have slid. And by the way, there are more that we keep uncovering that we're supposed to be starting, supposed to have started this year, that are going to be, and you will see them in the budget. Okay. So this would give us the opportunity to kind of catch our breath, okay, with this particular target. So with that, comments, questions?
Thank you, Councilmember Himes, for the work that you've done on this. I'd like to hear from Katrina or Carl about what they think about this. And, is this something that you're planning, Councilmember Himes, on proposing to council that we go forward with these numbers? Because it seems like the numbers have already changed. At least I think that's what Katrina was saying before. Some of those table numbers they've already changed. So is this something where we would have more updated information at the study session on the 26th, where we can all see those updated numbers? Or is this what you're wanting to propose going forward like to the whole council that we go with these numbers? And if that's the case, then what are the ramifications of that? Is this even possible? I wanted to hear from Katrina and Carl on what they thought about these particular numbers. It's all still pretty confusing to me, so I'm hoping for clarification from staff on how all of this would work going forward and what that means for property owners and, you know, future growth and development.
Councilmember Markley, that's a really good question. As we know, this is a very large spanning question that will have, you know, ranging effects over the next 20 years of how Gig Harbor grows. Councilmember Himes, I appreciate and staff appreciates, you know, your work on this. We will be partially responding to this within a white paper that will be put out a week prior to the work session that's been scheduled on the 26th. The buildable lands report was just finalized and posted onto the county's website on Thursday or Friday of last week. And so now we have actual capacity information that Carl and I are actively looking at and analyzing kind of what our development capacity looks like. And again, as we've been stating over the past year, the capacity and the demand are both important parts of the equation to look at in determining this, our targets moving forward. So I do think that there is merit looking at what the small city paper stipulated for where kind of the negotiations are right now, noting that they are not final, nor have those decisions been approved by the governing bodies of those cities. This is kind of initial targets. I do think that there is merit to looking at some of the ways that Councilmember Himes has looked at this. But Carl and I are really putting together a full-blown analysis of the previous targets, the previous targeting exercises, what our annual growth rates were, what decisions the city made along the way in terms of code amendments and development agreements that had the growth accelerated to the rate that it was, looking at annual growth rates and how those occurred. Because again, the decision that is ultimately going to be made is going to be long lasting and long felt. And so we prefer to respond to that via the white paper and at the work session on the 26th that this committee directed us to schedule.
Okay, thank you, Katrina.
I would think, and just my thoughts, the numbers, there's always going to be updated numbers. No question about it.
Cindy, I'm sorry, Councilmember Himes. Cindy, could you please switch over Councilmember Franich? He's on the attendee side again. Thank you.
Okay. Get Jim Branich back in here. There we go. Okay, we got you back, Jim. There's going to be updates, as Katrina was mentioning, you know, on an ongoing basis. I can see that, no question about that. From my perspective, is there are some key assumptions that are in what I've presented, and those key assumptions are the big deals. You can adjust the numbers, but the key assumptions, and the key assumptions would be, number one, we start with a proportionate share based on population. That's a big assumption. It's not written down anywhere, but yeah, it is. At a higher level, it's there. It's there. That is, your starting population is proportionate. Your population growth is proportionate to your existing population as a percentage of the total regional population. That's number one. Number two, we overachieved. We should get some credit for that. Okay, and the 800 dwelling units number, that's pretty much fact. In fact, that is fact. That number's accurate. The issue there will be, you know, should we get credit for that? I obviously feel strongly that we should. Some people may not feel that way. So I think that's another one that's a big assumption here. And those items can kind of go with the flow relative to changing of some of these numbers. if the methodology is the same and the underlying assumptions are the same, certain numbers can change. And you just kind of go with the flow at that point. But so I think the big thing is the proportionate share. That's huge, and forward credit for the overbuild in the 2010 to 2020 period. Those are key in my mind.
Who ultimately makes that decision, Councilmember Hymes, as far as if we get a credit or not? Do you know who is it? Pierce County? Is it, who makes that decision to say these numbers? Yes, this is looks good. You should get credit for that. Let's do that. Like who does that? Who makes that decision?
Good question. The prior to that decision, though, I think we at least have to go forward with what we believe is, from a city perspective, is the correct number. Okay. And by the way, many of these numbers in here they were submitted by the cities. They were not mandated by Pierce County. That's my understanding. I don't know, Carl, if you want to elaborate on that, but that's my understanding. So where we're at this stage is not having submitted something yet. Whatever we submit will be hopefully the starting and ending point, but it may be just the starting point of some sort of negotiation. I hate to use that word, but would use it.
Councilmember Hymes, Councilmember French has a question.
Yes.
Do you have a moment?
Oh, I'm sorry, Jim.
Yeah, thank you. On page 15, when it talks about at the very bottom, the city of Milton has already exceeded its 2030 population growth targets by 1,055. Can you speak to has there been any discussion that you've heard about Milton on how they feel about that? And was that taken into consideration when they have their population growth based at 600 on table 14?
As far as I know, Councilmember French, there was not any discussion as far as Milton goes. I mean, they were not real engaged in the process at GMCC, and so I don't know that was taken into consideration when they came up with their target number. Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, by the way, of the bigger towns or cities, Milton and Ording both were in the upper echelons of achieving, let's say, a midpoint target in 2020. Ording also has a lower percentage, that 549 over 8,635. So I realize correlation is not causation, but it becomes very, let's say, very obvious something's going on here. The only one that didn't do that is Bonnie Lake, and Bonnie Lake's got Tehela. And that explains everything.
Exactly. Well, I'd be kind of curious to see if there was how Milton and Ording, if there's any that played any role in either AHBL's rationale or the Pierce County Council. And my other question is, Katrina or Carl, several meetings ago, we were talking about 1 to 1.4%. Is that the number that you were talking about?
That's correct, Councilmember Franish.
So do you have the number at 1%, the housing units, and at 1.4?
Councilmember French, we're working to provide all of that in the white paper that will be given in advance of the work session.
Okay, I'd be curious to see how that fits in with, I can't do the math off the top of my head on how that really fits in with Councilmember Hymes' rationale. I think Councilmember Hymes' rationale has some merit to it. And I would not like to see us just dismiss that out of hand. So I guess, you know, until we have the work study session, I think that was when we'll really get into the nitty gritty of this. As I said, I think I happen to agree with Councilmember Himes's rationale on what he's talking about, but especially in light of, I wish you kind of had that number now, because as Councilmember Himes pointed out, if you do the math on table 14, without us or Pacific, who is probably not going to really make a difference one way or another, we're only 1,017 away from meeting the aggregate total.
Yeah, yeah. By the way, you can get to answer your first question, you can get a rough guesstimate. If you go by the proportionate share, it results in a 14.3% increase over the 24 years, okay? Before, when we were talking 1% a year average, that's 24% over those 24 years. So there's a huge difference there, okay? And again, it comes down to what underlies the 14.3%, which is proportionate share, okay? And whatever underlies the 1 to 1.3%, which I never did fully understand, but those numbers came from somewhere. So it'll give you an idea of the what's causing these numbers to move, okay? It's not just the 800 units, that 14.3% versus 24%, for example, at 1% average annual increase. That's huge. That's almost half right there, okay? That's causing this difference. I also may add that when we, and I don't know what Pierce County's rationale is, do they want to put out a higher target than in total than the 18,535? If we go much above 1,000 units, we're going to put them over, okay, for sure.
So within those shares of the city, recall that these are what staff brought forward to HBL. These are not policy political decisions that have been made yet by the
Right.
policymakers.
These are submissions. Yeah, got it. So yeah, it's the best available information we got right now, we put it that way. Any other questions?
If I
So,
could- Sorry.
pardon?
Oh, sorry. I was just also going to note, you know, we're talking about, Milton and Ording and their numbers looking sort of lower, you know, and sort of stands out in that way. You have to consider the capacities that those cities have.
Yeah.
For housing units, you know, and you look at their numbers, they're quite a bit lower than what our capacity would be. So that is taken into account, and that was taken into account when AHBL proposed the first round of numbers that we kind of started from in this process.
Yeah.
Through their analysis. So I just wanted to mention that when we're talking about this, we have to keep in mind what the city can actually do with the land that they've got.
And I think, Carl, that's the point that I think is really important in this discussion, you know, in setting a target number, because our city has zoning right now, and we have properties that have a capacity on them. And so, like Carl said, some of these smaller cities like Ording that are largely built out, they don't have available capacity that the city currently has. And so we don't want to arbitrarily make a policy adjusted decision about future growth that could force us as the city to reduce the zoning on our properties that we currently already have. And what I mean by that is we have to have our target, or how much we're going to grow in the next 20 years, within a certain percentage of our available capacity, or we're out of whack with the Growth Management Act. And so within this decision, if we're looking at an 800, going by Councilmember Heim's analysis, an 800 person population increase, and we end up having through the buildable lands report a capacity of, let's say, 3,000, then what we're saying is our city is either too large or our zoning is too intense. And therefore we would need to either reduce our zone, our areas that are currently zoned, whatever they are, in order to reduce our capacity for development. And so why Carl and I have not, why this white paper is not out yet is because we've been waiting for the buildable lands analysis to show what our current capacity is. Because what we don't want to do is put forward a population target that we know we're going to surpass, noting that in the comp plan, if those two are out of whack, then we will be forced by the state to reduce our zoning. And then we can get into property rights discussions and things like that. So staff appreciate the discussion, but we want to carefully put this forward to the council, noting the history, what has happened with the process, what the current numbers say, and be able to do a SWOT analysis of pros and cons to each and potential ramifications. Because again, this decision will impact a lot of folks.
Yeah,
depending on what we do.
Yeah, you've hit on two key points here. The first one is my realization that available land doesn't provide infrastructure. And once you accept that fact, just because we're drowning in land, or supposedly drowning in land, doesn't build roads for us, doesn't make other things happen, okay? At least over a certain time period. Okay, right now the focus is on available land as the degree to which you should build, the rate at which you should build. Okay, and I guess what I'm doing is challenging that assumption. I think that's a bad assumption. And by the way, it goes both ways. When you look at the chart that we were looking at before that came out of the buildable lands report, Pierce County as a county met 27% of what they needed in 2020 to meet the 2020 target. They were way off, way off. Gig Harbor was above. We were at 93%, okay? And there were a couple other communities, particularly Ording was one of them. I think they were over 50%, if I remember correctly. And I forget the other ones. I could rattle them on. But it begs the question: what is the ramifications of that? Okay. For example, if we err on if we overbuild relative to a target, okay, what are the bad things that happen to you? And I would assume that going the other way is even worse. That is, if you don't build what you've signed up to build, okay, and you can't support employment and you can't support other things, what happens? And that's a discussion we need to have. Right now, we're looking at one side of it. If we build shy to or if we overbuild to a target, what happens? Versus if we underbuild to a target, what happens? And that's an interesting thing. I still haven't figured out exactly what happens. If something happens, I know a bunch of communities like Tacoma in particular that's in deep, deep trouble right now. I mean, they're way down on the list in terms of what if we weren't in this exercise right now and they had to meet the 2030 target, they couldn't make it. I'm absolutely convinced of it. And I think the numbers, I think they're down at 17%, if I remember correctly, something like that. They're way down there. They have to rezone the whole city and do a whole bunch of things. So that would be worthwhile. And I guess that was a question, I guess, for Katrina, for you and Carl. What is the ramifications of not meeting target? And if you overbuild or if you underbuild, what happens to you?
It's not so much an overbuild or underbuild, it's a over plan or under plan. We're required by the Growth Management Act to have capacity for the amount of target that we have, the population that are coming
Yeah.
to the city.
Yeah.
And the state can come down on us. There's been numerous jurisdictions that have undersized or oversized their zoning or their urban growth areas and have been taken to the Growth Management Hearings Board. And so those really are the ramifications. I would like to note that within our analysis, Carl and I are looking at the both over and under. We're not looking at this from one side. We're looking at this from all sides in order to give council all the information necessary to make this decision.
Okay, Councilwoman Markley.
Yes, thank you. I was just gonna say, until we see what is in this document that Katrina and Carl are putting together, we could keep talking for another hour about this, but I don't think we're gonna have the information that we need to move forward. I think we should let them do what they're doing, taking what you've put into place into or what you've worked on into consideration on top of everything that they now know in the buildable lands report that they just got last week. And then wait and see what they say, on the 26th when the whole council is together to talk about this, because I feel like we're not going to get anywhere if we keep talking about it without all that information. I think we just need more information. We need all the pieces coming together so that they can better answer those questions of, if we do this, then this will happen. If we do that, then this will happen. But we don't have that yet because they're still working on their analysis and they're still working off the report they just got last week. So would you be in favor of just waiting, to finish this part of the discussion till the 26th, where we actually have those numbers and we have all the information coming from staff? Because I just feel like we're not going to get the answers to the questions that we want yet until they've had a chance to put that together.
As long as we have the essence of or at least if the numbers vary greatly, okay, obviously something in the assumptions vary greatly, okay, and in the methodology varies greatly, somewhere in there, okay, it has to. As long as we get, let's say, the alternative that I put forward somewhere out there that we understand, okay, and have the discussion, okay, and we'll have to focus it, called, hey, what kind of decision do we want to make? By the way, this isn't, one of the problems here is this isn't just a clear science type analysis thing. When you do this and you come up with the answer, there's the answer. We've got a bunch of what I call policy decisions buried in this thing, okay? And those policy decisions, I think, are the ones that and by the way, that's the reason I'm looking, why I wanted the study session, is to have that discussion on those policy items, okay? So that when we go forward, hey, we all agree this is what we're doing, okay, and why we're doing it. The other thing I'd mention, and then I'll get to you, Tony, and then to you, Councilmember French, on the overbuilding, let's say that we had in the 2013 to 2020 standpoint. If you go back and look at a lot of that stuff, okay, the problem was, and it's huge, and it's still with us today, is you look at development agreements, you looked at what I call overlays, PRDs, those kinds of things, and you look at preliminary plats. Most of that stuff was vested before the 2014 comprehensive plan was finished, okay, before that was locked in. The stuff you're seeing right now, a lot of that stuff goes back to 2007, 2008, 2010, all that stuff up there at North Creek. That was 2010, if I remember correctly, that the preliminary plat, okay? More than just the zoning, the preliminary plat was actually locked in at that point, okay? And legally, there's nothing you can do about it. That's a done deed. So I think we need to really focus on, yeah, this is a long lead process. And another good thing, once we find out, I think, what the ramifications of this are, do we have plans on the fly? For example, if we would have to change whatever in code or in future comprehensive plans to accommodate what that would look like. Because I think these things got very long tails on them, as we've seen with these preliminary plats and these development agreements and these development agreements. Okay, so with that, Tony.
So my question is, let's say, and this is to Katrina and Carl, we take Councilmember Himes' analysis and we come forward with a population target of 820. And the powers that be it at PRCS or PSRC or whoever, say, well, no, really, you should be at 2,000. What happens at that point?
So that's a good question. With that, I do want to say, before I answer that, I get this feeling like we're kind of gearing up for a fight against PCRC and GMCC, and that's not the case. You know, they know that Gig Harbor is doing our analysis, that we're looking at our capacities, and there's no indication that they're going to tell us what number we have to plan for. Part B to the answer of that is the state, it needs to be reasonable, right? So if we say we're going to grow by 800 people and we have a development capacity of 5,000, that is going to be seen as inconsistent, and they will not allow us to do that. And so that's the second part of the equation that we're needing to look at. And Councilmember Himes also, mentioned that there's previously approved plats and things of that nature that we currently have land use entitlements for. So how many homes are there currently in the pipeline? And again, we're analyzing this, and multiplying that by 2.2. I know that we're recording here. I would wager to think that just in our pipeline, we have over 800 people. And so what we could have is a large inconsistency and an unapprovable comp plan. And so that's what we're trying to analyze, is we need to look at what do we have land use entitlements for, and we have that information. What is our total capacity? And then, kind of look at it from the way that we have looked at it. I think in the past, the targets have been done commensurate with, total population size. They also can be done based on total land area. With this committee, and we've said from the very beginning, we're going to take a different approach, get the council involved from the very beginning, look at this from from what makes sense for Gig Harbor. And I think to date, we've done that. And I think we now have all the pieces necessary in order to provide the policymakers with what they'll need to make the decision.
So the follow-up question would be, all right, let's say we propose 800 and we're allowed to go with 800. But as you said, our capacity can do much more than that. We'll use your number, 5,000. In order to stay consistent, we would have to then go and downzone a bunch of property in order to make the capacity get more equal to the target we have. So let's say we could be at 1,200 or 1,500 capacity versus the 5,000. Then you're getting into all kinds of questions about what do the property owners think about that.
Yeah, takings. And so in order to, it's not that we don't want to have this discussion, but as Tony, as you just mentioned, that we want to know what order of magnitude the problem is, if there's a
Right.
problem, in order to be able to advise the policymakers on different paths forward.
And that's the point I'm trying to make. Thank you.
Okay, Jim, you're on.
Well, this is, I'm the only, well, I'm not the only one, but I keep beating the drum on local control. And here we
I'm
go.
with you on that.
We're right in neck deep in if we had local control and we didn't have the state and Puget Sound Regional Council and all these top-down organizations telling us what we have to do, we'd be in a lot better place. But I know that game was lost long ago. So I concur with Councilmember Markley. We could talk about this philosophically for hours. I believe that the staff is, and I really appreciate the tenure or the tenor that this administration and the staff has had through this process of letting this committee and the council be involved. It wasn't like this over the last, the last 10 years. And it's huge, because if the previous administration and council had taken the approach that this administration and staff are taking, we'd be in a lot better place. But I agree with Councilmember Markley, but I also agree with Councilmember Himes. And I believe that staff will take all of the elements that we've been discussing, and they won't discount any of them. And when we have this work study session, that they'll be prepared to talk about what Councilmember Himes has proposed and have a chance to go through the report that came out last Friday. And then we can really start piecing all this together in a more coherent manner. The thing that bothers me or that I could find could be a little bit troublesome is this is a very complex issue. And this isn't just something that you just pick up and you look at for a half hour and you can figure it all out and come to the best conclusion. So, I don't know if after the planning commission meeting, or excuse me, the work study session that we're going to have, whether or not we need to reconvene and talk about any issues that may come up out of that. I guess our next meeting is November 4th. Is that right? Or when is it in November?
First Monday in November. Yeah.
It is November 1st.
November 1st.
Oh,
Okay.
Thanks.
So I would hope that on the agenda for that meeting, that we will at least have a recap of what is being discussed by the full council on the 26th. I think that would be helpful. And then, because I think that the three of us, Councilmember Markley, Councilmember Himes, and myself, are the most well-versed at following the subject. Nobody more than Councilmember Himes, and I'll keep saying it for the next 3 months. I really appreciate all the effort that Councilmember Himes has put into this. I think it's really important. And so anyway, that's it. I agree with Councilman. We could talk forever and ever about this. I think staff, if they nod their heads up and down, that they're not going to discount Councilmember Himes's suggestions, and all that will be included.
Absolutely.
All right. Very good. Thank you.
okay, great. Let's see. I think we beat this one pretty thoroughly, but I think it's been a worthwhile discussion.
Yeah, my former harbor master would say we ground it down to a fine powder.
That's right. That's right. Now, as long as it doesn't explode on us.
There you go.
Powder. Okay. Any other questions or comments on this? Otherwise, we'll just move along to the buildable lands discussion. Here, I sent that thing out. I sent out a things to look at because it's only 219 pages long, the whole report. So anyway, I thought the pages that were specific to Gig Harbor, okay? And it's pages 98 through 105 were the pages that are of, once you get all the definitions out of the way and some of the methodology, that's where the kind of the rubber meets the road. That's what's specific to Gig Harbor. And I guess to lead off that section, Carl, you and Katrina, I think it'd be worthwhile for you to jump in here and kind of tell us where you are. I mean, this now is the final report, as I understand it. We're in agreement with the numbers that are in here, and they are the numbers.
Yeah, this has been published now, so this is the final report.
What's the date on that?
September 30th, 2021.
Okay, the one I'm looking at, it says September 16th. Did our numbers change very much?
Not had an
It did change,
opportunity.
and we're analyzing those, Tony. We just got the report on Friday, so we don't have the actual delta, but there were some assumptions that changed regarding market factor and some of our pipeline.
Okay.
Okay. The discussion on this one, I don't know how deep you want to go. I think the land that's there, you're correct. I'm sure we could figure out how to squeeze 386 or whatever the magic number is that I had, dwelling units onto the lands that's available. Okay, we've got quite a bit of land. It may not be zoned the way we want it, but we've got a lot of land that would support that. So I don't think that's an issue here. We're not struggling to find land at this point. Are there other things that we want to look at though in that buildable lands report? For example, residential versus commercial. Yes, Councilmember French.
I was just wondering if Carl, Katrina could, off the top of their head, could give me a number on, from that buildable lands report, on what the number of infill development we have available.
The new report?
Yeah. I don't know if it's changed from the old report. I don't have that report in front of me, so either the new one or the old one.
In fact, if you get those two tables up on a shared screen, that would be great. The two tables at the end of our Gig Harbor section that show it's either right at the end or close to the end, that shows the different categories of land and what we've got available.
Councilmember Kranich, are you speaking of underutilized lands?
Yes.
Yeah, I hate that word, but
Pierce County did not summarize them holistically. So we have them by zone.
I think this is the table, this table, or let me see here.
Yeah. Let's see.
Well, that's City of Tacoma.
No,
I'm
that's
in the wrong section, sorry.
Yeah,
You
okay.
need to get down into the 90s, like 90 or 98, 99, 100, something like that.
Yeah, here we go.
Aha, there we go.
Here we go.
Now go to the,
This is the new one, right? Most recent.
Let's see, yes, it is.
okay, keep going a little further yet.
Close.
There you go.
Good.
Okay, now we're starting to get into the meat. Yeah. Well, keep going a little further.
Keep going, one more.
One more. Yeah. Here we go.
Vacant, underutilized.
Okay. A little further.
Well,
Oh,
Aha.
that's the one you like? Okay.
Yeah, those
Okay,
are
I
the
got
two I like right there. Those are the ones. And it gives you,
could you magnify that a little bit if I go to my top thing there? Okay.
Did you get it, Councilmember French?
Yeah, I just, now it's centered. I went to my 150 and it was kind of off the screen. So now I've got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, if you could walk us through there, Carl, with just a couple of highlights, like the R1 and R2 being the big residential.
Yeah, so we're looking at housing capacity by dwelling unit here. So obviously in our R1 and R2, where we're seeing we have the most capacity available, about overall, including pipeline units, you're looking at around 846 total. So single unit, 93 underutilized lands, we have room for 291. And on vacant land, we have 373. So that's kind of how it breaks down. So for R2, 714, including the 143 that are included in the pipeline. Underutilized, which is what I think Councilman French was just asking about. We're looking at 99 in R2, 291 in the R1, a total of 466.
He was looking at vacant single unit.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So 379 then would be the total there.
With
Yeah.
almost half being RB2.
Yeah, a lot in RB2. I was just gonna say, yeah, RB2 would be, we have a lot, which kind of surprised me actually when I saw the numbers come out on this.
And remind me again what RB2 is.
So residential business zone, so it's kind of a buffer zone between sort of lower density residential and commercial.
Is it kind of a mixed use sort of
Yeah.
designation? Okay.
Yeah, RB1 and RB2 are kind of similar. They're both sort of similar zones in that way.
RB, they allow, does that number take into consideration if somebody's putting a duplex or a triplex, or is that assumption there with those numbers, just a single house?
I would have to look that up, Councilman French. I'm not sure if I have the answer to that right off the top of my head.
Because I believe duplexes and triplexes are allowed under the RB designations.
I believe that's right.
So within the RB2 district, we assume 30% of the total acreage will develop in a residential capacity and 70% will be utilized for a commercial capacity. And there's also a 10% residential market factor reduction. And I believe that that's because we have the 174 vacant single units. So that would make sense. And then a underutilized of 50%. So that would make sense. We only have 9.53 acres of vacant RB2 land. And the assumption for residential would be I believe it's 6 units per acre. So it doesn't necessarily break it out between duplex, triplex, but it's a total amount of units on the vacant acreage.
And so there's only 89 housing units in the R1 pipeline right now?
Yes.
Wow, that number seems awfully low.
Well, a lot of it's been built out to this point. You know, most of it's either been built, or remember that a lot of the land such as Harbor Hill or areas like that is all converted to a PRD zone.
Right, but what about the development across the street up on Burnham, across from McCormick Creek?
That's
North
R2.
Creek.
The North Creek development is R2.
It's R2.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is in, like you say, it's in dwelling units, not in acres. Okay. And yeah, I think Councilmember French's question is a good one because you have to make assumptions to convert raw land into, or buildable land into dwelling units. Depends on what you want to do, what you assume you're going to do there.
If you're on the Pierce County's website pulling this report, there's a the data tables of the capacity that look like this. And it
Okay,
breaks it down by zone, and it's vacant and underutilized in each of our zones. And then it breaks down all the assumptions that were utilized
okay.
on that. If you
I can get to that, Katrina. It's in this report.
Oh, it's in
really
there.
want to dive into the assumptions utilized to generate the capacity numbers.
Oh, this must be the Appendix A they were talking about.
Yeah, so the report that's been published is, you'll notice, is 461 pages versus 291. So it's got a little more in it to look at, or, our viewing pleasure. So here's that RB2 zone kind of broken down into total housing capacities versus vacant versus underutilized. And then it gets into the acreages that are used and the assumptions that Katrina was talking about.
Okay, so market factor and utilities and all that stuff would be in there too. All the things you subtract out from the gross acreage to get the net buildable land that you can put those units on.
Adjusted residential net acres, yep.
Okay,
And then you can also see from the RB2, if you go, there's the housing capacity calculations. That's kind of the dark blue. And then below that, an additional dark blue is employment capacity calculations for RB2. So you can see that they're stacked on one another, and that the total capacity in vacant RB2 for population is 250, and the vacant capacity for employment is 457 jobs. So if you look at the housing unit capacity, or the total housing capacity, that's in people. If you look at total employment capacity, that's in jobs.
Could you go back to that first slide, please?
The last tables we were looking at?
Yeah,
Okay, one moment.
and I don't want to turn this into going backwards on the conversation, but it was mentioned, we come at right now, according to that, we have, when you look at the bottom right corner, 2046. If you do the math on that at 2.2 pph, that's not going to jive too well with any of the numbers we discussed earlier.
Yeah, it's
So
about
Councilmember
4,400
Hines,
people.
the 2046, that's people. So you would divide that by 2.2.
Oh, I thought we were looking at dwelling
Yeah,
units.
this says dwelling units.
Yeah, it is in dwelling units.
It says dwelling units. Well, that does say that. And see, that's Carl, that's the question I asked you earlier today, was on these
Yeah.
tables to ask Jessica, because it talks about housing unit capacity. But if you look at the acreage of the tables below and you divide that by the people, then you can see that those are really population numbers, not dwelling units.
Yeah, I know. I think we definitely need to get clarification on that.
Well, absolutely, because if we're talking about trying to have consistency with the comp plan and the numbers and, all the rest of what we discussed for the last hour, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, because if that's dwelling units, that's an additional 4,500 people.
Mm-hmm.
But if it isn't, it's only 930 people, which isn't that far off from the numbers we were talking about. If you divide the 2046 by 2.2, you get 930, which is kind of around, what we were talking about earlier. So yeah, definitely clarification on that's going to be a must to figure out which direction is it.
Absolutely.
Especially if you don't know what dwelling units means. Is that apartments? Is that condos? Is it single family residential?
It depends on the zone.
Depend. Yeah.
It means all of those.
Yep.
Yeah.
'Cause, 'cause, yeah. Yeah. So, oh my gosh.
Well, this is a very interesting table. This really, we don't have any R3.
We have R3, we just don't have a lot available, and there isn't a lot zoned R3. When you look at our zoning map, it's just was not a very highly utilized zone.
Yeah,
A lot more RB2, which both RB2 and R3 fall under the same land use classification.
well, you know, I'm questioning that Waterfront Millville number because, you know, I'm looking out the window at a vacant lot, and I know there's one down at the end of Novak. So anyway,
There's a number of things as we began to look through these today. There's still some questions. Waterfront Millville jumped out at us too, that we have a question about. And we want to make sure that our comments were put into this final report. So we're still truth checking it.
Okay, Councilmember Markley.
Yes, I was just, so this is all stuff you guys are gonna be looking at and putting in this white paper, right? You know, getting all these questions answered and having all that ready for the meeting on the 26th. I'm assuming you know, you'd have to, I don't envy you having to go through all these pages and try to figure this out. You know, you guys are amazing and thank you for what you do. But yeah, I guess
They
it's
live
really,
this, come on.
what's that?
They live for this.
Yeah. Hey, you know, I never used to think I'd be interested in reading budgets, but I kind of like it now. So, you know, you never know. But no, yeah, it's definitely something that I'm really looking forward to seeing it all broken down and specific to what is actually happening in our city with how much land there is to build on. It doesn't seem like we don't have land for another Harbor Hill sized development. It just seems like it's going to be kind of like what Ording was saying, you know, it would be mostly short plats left, right? That aren't currently vested. I mean, I know there's some developments off of Burnham that are larger that are already, you know, coming at some point, but like for projects that haven't even started yet, land that hasn't been built on yet, there's not a whole lot left. And we've also done away with development agreements, and we've also done away with PRDs. So I don't see how, you know, we're not going to end up with another Harbor Hill situation. Unfortunately, we have the situation we have because infrastructure wasn't planned out prior to those being approved. And so now we're in these messes that we're in. But going forward, we can, I would hope we could plan a little bit better for what we have, for the rest of what we have to achieve, that the state is telling us we have to achieve, and try to get ahead of some of it. But at least we don't have much left as far as like gigantic developments that can be built, like with thousands of houses. We're talking about what, 100 or less maybe per development from here on out. Would that be a reasonable? I mean, 100 houses is still 100 houses. I mean, I'm looking at these 89 houses going in or whatever it is right across the street from my development and thinking how much worse the Burnham roundabout's going to be once those are all occupied, you know. And then we've got apartments coming in on Burnham Drive, I think, and some other, you know, land, but it's not going to be in the thousands of homes anymore that can be developed in one place. Is that right? We're down to like 100 maybe or less per property parcel that a developer would be able to develop from here on out?
Under current zoning, yes. You know, if we had some of our vacant properties that were rezoned to R3, then that could be a different story.
Who decides that?
What was that?
Who decides that? The switching of is that something the state could mandate?
No, that's something that would be a policy decision by
Okay.
the council adopting the 2024 update. Again,
Okay.
we would have to show consistency between, you know, the comp plan and our targets. But you brought up a really good point, and I've asked Paul to pull the total amount of units from Harbor Hill north and south divisions. But part of the analysis that Carl and I are doing are looking at the past decisions that were made and how they accumulated to the going over the target. I have a hunch that if we were to remove the Harbor Hill area, you know, we would probably be relatively balanced with our in terms of our target. So looking at past decisions and figuring out how big of, you know, how those played into where we are today, that's going to be important to learn from the past. Another thing, and I know I said this at the last meeting, but looking to Pierce County in terms of what they're doing, not only in the rural area over by Tacoma Screw, because that is in the rural area, but what's going on in the UGA and how is that being developed and what zoning assumptions do they have there and how is that contributing to our infrastructure problems and what can we do about that, you know, through the UGAMA, you know, the one on 38th and Hunt, there's another one coming out on Burnham within the county. And so, you know, getting a handle on what's going on around us is going to also be an important factor to this. And then Councilmember Himes mentioned this very briefly moments ago, but looking at code and comp plan updates that we can do to ensure consistency between land use decisions and our comprehensive plan and the targets. Most jurisdictions have requirements within the comp plan and the code that a site-specific rezone or a comp plan amendment cannot be done unless you can show consistency with your growth targets. And to my knowledge, that was not done during the development agreement approvals or the code amendments allowing for PRDs. So, you know, we want to be able to look at our policy documents and our codes and put those measures into place to allow for that that analysis to be conducted and provided to the policymakers when they're making those decisions.
Absolutely agree on that one. Okay. Is there anything further that we need to discuss on this document? I think we've got a pretty good idea what these, like I said, I think these two tables are the magic tables that I latched onto in the old report called, this is really interesting stuff. I think it tells a pretty good story, like you said. Hey, we do have capacity, okay, for some things, no question about that, that we can rely on. If there's no other comments, is there anything else that we need to cover here?
I don't believe so.
Okay, very, very good. Okay, I think we've enlarged our horizons. I don't think we've solved a whole lot of things, but we've, effective anything, we probably got a headache from, we've complicated things even more. Now that we understand more, the more we understand, the bigger the headache. And I think that's true. So with that, yes, Councilmember Vranich.
You know, I've noticed on this agenda, do we not, and I don't see anybody waiting, but do we not take public testimony?
No, we never have.
Okay, well, we take public comment at the Public Works Committee meetings, so.
Yeah.
Will there be public comment at the study session on the 26th, or is that going to be like normal, just no public comment? And
It's a study session, therefore there's no decisions,
right.
Legislative decisions made in there. So my assumption is there would be no public comment.
Okay.
This is,
Making sure.
my understanding is this is the council discussing something amongst ourselves, basically. Okay.
All right.
Move.
With
Move.
that, okay, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, have a good one, and we'll think about this more.
All right.
Thank you.
Good stuff. Thank you.
Everybody.
Bye.